So, welcome to the session on making dashboards with Quarto. I am sort of in a state of mind of hoping for snow soon. So, I have named this talk Dashing Through the Snow or Sharing Your Data in a Quarto Dashboard. So, my name is Cetinkaya-Rundel. I am a professor at Duke University and also a developer educator at Posit. Posit is a company that sort of sponsors the development of Quarto, the open source product. So I will start by introducing you to Quarto a little bit, and then we're going to dive right into making dashboards with Quarto. So let's go ahead and get started here. So what is Quarto? Quarto is an open source scientific and technical publishing system, and it builds on standard Markdown with features that are essential for scientific communication. So your prose is written in Markdown and rendered with Pandoc. Computational cells are executed with Jupyter kernels. And the nice thing with Quarto is that you can get dozens of output formats. So we're going to be talking about dashboards today, but I'll do very brief sort of like demos of creating an HTML file, a plain HTML file, or a presentation or a PDF, so on and so forth. And you can have specialized project types. So you can use Quarto to create a standalone PDF document, or you can use it to write a webbook. So with Quarto, you can basically weave together narrative and code to produce elegantly formatted output as documents, web pages, blog posts, books, and more. And Quarto is not the only solution out there that sort of gets you this, but some of my favorite things about Quarto is that there's a consistent implementation of what I find to be attractive and handy features across outputs. For example, the way you create tab sets in a presentation or a book is exactly the same. Code folding is available throughout. I am an educator. I oftentimes am teaching code, and that's one of the most handy tools that I have to sort of like hide away code from learners for a brief moment to get them to think about things and then give them an opportunity to unfold it to see the answers, for example. As well as syntax highlighting. So these are implemented in exactly the same way across different output formats. In addition, Quarto has native multilingual support for Python, Julia, and Observable, and more via the Jupyter engine, and also for R via the Knitr engine. And importantly, Quarto comes out of the box with defaults that meet accessibility guidelines, as well as features that enable sort of good practices for producing accessible documents. One of my favorite things is that you have an easy way, for example, of writing alternative text for any figures that you include in a Quarto document, whether that is an image that you're embedding in a document as a PNG file or a figure that you're generating computationally, for example. So how does it work? Well, with Quarto, the computations happen with the Jupyter engine or Knitr or Observable.js. The markdown is handled by, and then out comes a markdown plain text markdown document that then Pandoc processes with many enhancements that Quarto adds on top of that. And you can get a variety of outputs, as I said, at the end. So here, for example, is a very sort of like vanilla, if you will, notebook that we're seeing. And we are going to be building a dashboard where we're sort of like tracking snowfall in the French Alps. And so I have some code here that creates a sort of a plot for snowfall over time, about 15 days prior to yesterday and 15 days of forecast. And basically, here is sort of the rendered output for this. Nothing fancy going on here. It's a very sort of like plain markdown, plain Python notebook, and then we're rendering it, and we can see the plot at the bottom. Now, what are some things that we can do to enhance this document with Quarto? I can add a YAML. So here I've added a title. And I've also added some things like I want to change the theme to one of the Boots Watch themes. So it's going to have that minty green color to it. And I want to change the highlighting style of my code cells as well. So the output looks now like this. So we are seeing the same content, but as we can see, the sort of the look has changed a little bit with just a couple updates to this YAML that we've added, the front matter that we've added on top of the file, and going from the source code to the output, we're just running Quarto render to get from point A to point B. We can do more things. Here I have done some I've added more options to the front matter that allow me to sort of like handle how code cells are operating. So by default, my code cells are going to be folded, and I'll have a toolbar that I can use to sort of manipulate or express preferences on whether I want them folded or not. And as you can see also at the very bottom here where I was creating a figure, I've added a label to my figure that I could use for cross-referencing later on. And I've also added a caption to my figure as well. So this is now what the output looks like, again, simply running Quarto render. Obviously, a very bare document so far, just a title. We have some sort of data processing code that we perhaps even want to hide away entirely here. But then we can see that we have our outputting plot. This is that the handy code tools sort of widgets that we have asked in the front matter. And as you can see, now my figures are being counted automatically for me, and I have a caption that I can give them as well. We can make other changes, more structural changes to the YAML, and for example, express that we want a different output format. This could be PDF, this could be a presentation format. So here I'm going to demo using the same input file, so nothing has changed in the document itself, but I am outputting to a Reveal.js presentation. And here is what the slide deck would then look like. You can see that my second level headings have now become slide titles, and everything else about my plot is exactly the same. All right, so what does the workflow for building dashboards with Quarto look like? Or building really, or creating anything with Quarto, starting with an IPython notebook look like? We said that the comment that we want to run is Quarto render. So each of the Quarto commands start with Quarto, and we can run these in the terminal. So with the render command, by default, I will be writing to HTML, but I can choose to write to, say, docx, so Word files as well. I can also do a live preview, which will allow me to, every time I save my notebook, allow me to view the output sort of like almost instantaneously. Obviously, the delay there will depend on how much compute is having to be redone, perhaps in your document. But if you're executing your cells as you go along and you're just making some changes to the markdown text or the styling of your document, that should be almost instantaneous. And again, we can do this with an output to just HTML by default or other formats like docx or PDF. You'll also see that in addition to starting with an IPyNB, I can also start with a Quarto Markdown document, which is in essence the same idea of a computational notebook. We have in this document plain text, so our prose, and computation, so code cells interspersed just like you would in a IPyNB as well. But it's a plain text document, which means, which is preferable to some because we are actually able to sort of easily check it into version control, for example. And probably my primary reason for choosing to work with QMD files, these plain text notebook files, over IPyNBs. And another thing is that when you render the full document, it actually will execute all your code cells as well. So you don't need to have ran them in a particular order before sort of rendering the whole document. So here is what a plain text notebook with QMD file might look like. So in this case, this is still where I was outputting to a Reveal.js file, for example. I have the YAML on top where I give some metadata. So in this case, the only metadata that's visible in the output is going to be the title, but I can add standard metadata fields like author, institution, so on and so forth. And then my code cells are identified with these 3 backticks, these fences, and then in curly braces goes the sort of the engine or the language that I'm using. So if these were R code cells, then the R would go into the curly braces. Here I'm adding some Python code into my document. And anything that is plain text should look familiar, just standard markdown basically. And so here, for example, I have a new section with some standard markdown sort of header, and then some code at the bottom that displays some table using itables. So how do we, some reasons, as I said, for sort of choosing to work with QMD files is that they're editable with any text editor. And there are extensions for VS Code, Neovim, and Emacs. And there's these Quarto extensions that you can use that are handy for giving you some buttons for live rendering and previewing, for example. Really importantly, I think that cells always run in the same order, and it integrates with version control well because it is plain text. And you can cache your output with either the Jupyter cache or Quarto's freezer, where you can sort of define whether you want the computation to rerun every time you change anything in the file or only when you explicitly render the file. There are lots of pros and cons sort of between using QMD files and IPyMB files. And I think most importantly, for getting started with anything new, the important thing is that it works with what your choice might be. So if you feel more at home with one of these formats over the other, the nice thing is you can build a Quarto dashboard either way. Most of my examples, sort of my syntax examples going forward, will show QMD so that I can actually highlight the Quarto syntax a bit more easily. But as I said, you can take that document, and there's actually a command Quarto convert to go from a QMD file to IPyNB and vice versa. So if you find a Quarto dashboard out in the wild that you like, and it's in QMD format, but you'd rather edit it in an IPyNB, you can just run Quarto convert in between, and sort of that conversion is done for you, and you can move forward with that. So the rendering pipeline is that if you're in sort of like notebook workflow, there's no execution by default. The analyst is the one who is sort of like executing the code cells explicitly. And then we start with Jupyter, and basically that same pipeline we've shown before, end up with one of these outputs. If you are starting with a QMD, what happens first is that the code cells are ran through Jupyter so that we end up with that markdown document with your prose in plain markdown, as well as the output or any sort of images and whatnot that may have been created from executing the code. And then the rest of the pipeline is exactly the same. So let's take a look at some Quarto dashboards. So this is a dashboard that we're going to come back to one more time today and go a little bit deeper into it. But some things that you can see here is that we have some value boxes on top, and each of our visualizations are sort of like highlighted in these cards. And you'll be able to see in a little bit that I'm not explicitly creating all of these cards. Basically, as soon as I add a code cell, the Quarto dashboards will automatically create one of those cards for me. This particular dashboard also has a sidebar, which can be particularly helpful for interactive dashboards, even though this one is not one of those, where you could have some like UI elements in there for user input. But you can use that same layout for any sort of text that you want to be visible across the tabs. You can see that we have multiple tabs on top as folks are going through it. Here's another one where we are displaying, again, value boxes on top. You can see one of them is sort of highlighted in this yellow. So the color of these value boxes are actually ones that you can define yourself. Here we have some tab sets again. Another one where we are looking at and sort of a HTML widget, an interactive leaflet map. And here we have a sort of a model dashboard with a standard model card, and as well as some other information about your model. And the nice thing here is that you're not just like looking at a JSON dump, but you can give some context to what you're reading by easily embedding sort of plain narrative into your sort of dashboard as well. And here is one that is an interactive dashboard. So this is leveraging Shiny for Python, where the user can actually select the sort of the different species of penguins or islands they want to see the distributions of, and the figures interact with that. And here's another one where we're seeing different tab sets. So let's take a look real quick at one of these dashboards for 1 second, and then we'll dive back into the syntax. So as we've said, some of these elements are sort of Quarto specific. We have callouts that you can sort of expand and collapse. As I said, the value boxes are the colors are conditional on the values. So you can see the number of days below freezing changing based on the forecast versus historical. And you also can embed easily sort of HTML widgets, whether that is a leaflet map in this case, or an iTable that might allow you to easily sort of, sort your data and provide some like really cheap, if you will, and quick interaction for your users. All right. Very sorry about that. Why did I do this? Okay. All right. So we've taken a look at the demo, and you can also interact with the code that is available on a GitHub repository as well, if you like. How did we achieve this? Really one change to the notebook. The format is now dashboard. And once you've done that, there are many elements that you can add. You can add navigation bar and pages, sidebars, as we said, a layout that includes rows, columns, and tab sets, and also your plots, tables, and value boxes are represented in cards. As I mentioned, all of these components can be authored within sort of the IPyMB format, the customized UI, or with plain text QMD. So here, for example, we're looking at a notebook, a dashboard with a navigation bar and some pages on top. And so each first level heading makes up a new page. And then within those second level headings, divide up your page into multiple areas, which are going to be these cards where you can see the visualizations. We can have a global sidebar, again, with a first level heading with a sidebar class. So that's something that would look like this. As I said, particularly handy for interactive dashboards. Here we have a dashboard where there on top we have a sort of a focal chart, maybe something big that you might want to come back to, and then two smaller charts perhaps that go into more detail about certain aspects of what's on top. So we can customize the height of these rows, as you can see, as we are defining these second level headings. So here, for example, we have a 3-row layout, probably something like 20, 50, 30, or something like that. Another one, we can also have our orientation in columns, so something like this. So once you divide things into columns, and as you can see in the second column over here, we have 2 code cells that produce charts, and Quarto will automatically equally divide that area into 2 cards for you. If you want to play around with the row heights, you can further go ahead and do that, but by default, you don't have to specify a height. So here, for example, we can see a 3-column layout where each of the columns are divided into different numbers of cards based on the computational cells in there. We can also have tab sets. So this allows us to keep something constant, perhaps in this case on top, and then switch between. And that's simply by adding a tab set class. So here, for example, we're seeing the tab sets in operation between the different plots that some of them the analyst wants to you to see at all times, and some of them you can sort of browse between. In terms of plots, Plotly is a great choice for embedding plots into Quarto dashboards because it will sort of resize itself really nicely and easily without much effort from your end as the person creating the dashboards. And you can also have sort of these interactive widgets if you like. So one example we gave was the IPy leaflet, for example, and those will also nicely resize as well. And both of them can be enhanced with sort of like bringing in data that you're already plotting to, figure out where, for example, the map should be centered. For tables, we can use tabulate or my favorite iTables. One of the reasons why I like that is that you get this like interactivity built in without much effort. So simply by saying show me the data, I get a search bar and I can further customize that to see which layers of interactivity I want to have available. Value boxes are defined as basically these lists. So we can choose a color and we can choose a bootstrap icon to go along with it. And in this case, I'm using a function that I may have defined earlier on to calculate the value that should be shown in my value box. Alternatively, I can pull it out of a pre-calculated data set or something like that. So this would look something like this. And the color can also be, customized, depending on the value. You can set it to change as well. For text content, it's just basically plain text. So you can, as soon as you sort of add some text, it will create a separate card for that and present that for you in sort of separately from any of your code cells. You can do any customization to that text that you can do with sort of plain text markdown. And as I showed in the demo for this snowfall dashboard, we can leverage additional Quarto features like callouts, for example, collapsible callouts that you would use the same syntax in any other Quarto output, similarly in a Quarto dashboard as well. By default, the cards are expandable. You can turn this behavior off if you want, but the neat thing is that if you're particularly struggling with trying to get too much into a single page dashboard, for example, but you know that perhaps some of your users are going to want to dig deeper into things, the expand button is handy for that. For deployment, you have a variety of options. Importantly, these are just static HTML pages, so they can be deployed to any web server or web hosts. They can be sort of static once you render it a single time, particularly if the underlying data is not going to change. You can run these rendered on a schedule via a cron job, for example, or you can have parameterized reports where this is true for either static or scheduled reports where you can change the parameters and that will sort of like and when the dashboard is redeployed, it's going to get updated. And finally, interactive dashboards. To sort of like account for a little bit of time for questions, I won't go too far into the syntax for creating dashboards with interactive components, but we can, so here's one way we can sort of do parameterization. We can define parameters in a code cell. And then as we're rendering our dashboard, we can say this is for example, the value for the parameter that I want to assign. And for interactive dashboards, we can leverage Shiny. And you can deploy these with or without a server. So here's, for example, a simple Quarto dashboard with Shiny components. We can see on the sidebar, we have some user interaction, affordances for user interaction. And this sort of dashboard can be deployed on the cloud with a service by POSIT called Shiny Apps IO, or on Hugging Face, or we have instructions or information for rolling your own. And you can also do so sort of on-prem with a Shiny server or POSIT Connect. One of them is an open source solution. The other one is a commercial solution. And again, you could also roll your own there too. And new this year, some exciting developments in terms of deploying Shiny without a server, leveraging PyData. So there is an example for this linked in the slides if you would like to dig into that. And the code for that is available on a GitHub repository as well. Thank you so much for listening. Importantly, I should mention that Quarto Dashboards is available in Quarto 1.4 pre-release. This is a pretty stable pre-release. We expect this feature, along with everything, all the goodies that are upcoming in Quarto 1.4, to be released by February or so. But you can go ahead and download it either with pip install or from the Quarto documentation site. The Quarto documentation site is chock full of information, including a blog where we try to keep you updated on what's going on. Some lengthy dashboards documentation, along with a gallery for examples, and a little bit of information elsewhere you can find on Shiny for Python. And finally, my slides are linked at the bottom of this slide. So the URL for them is at the bottom of this slide. So if you would like to interact further with any of the dashboard examples I've shown you, all of those have the code available on GitHub on the dashboard gallery as well. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.